Today I am speaking with Frank Mathius, one of the former NCBC presidents, and so glad you could come and be with me for this interview.
It's a pleasure.
Let's talk about your early experience with the courts. When did you become employed with the court, and what was your career in the court
It's
system?
very, life can be serendipitous. I went to Washington. One of the fellow who was my roommate, and we stood up at each other's wedding, as a matter of fact, very close. We were the first two people from DePaul University in Chicago to go to Georgetown Law School. It was the time of the Vietnam War. I was clear by the end of my first year that I was going to be draft eligible, or if I got into the Army Reserve, I could use I could finish law school and, hopefully go in at an officer grade. I went through basic training at Fort Ord, California, the advanced course after that, and then went back to Georgetown the following year, but realized that my finances were not going to hold up, so I went back as a night student and was lucky enough first to work for the wonderful Polish congressman from my home district in Chicago, south side of Chicago. At that time, the primary language, according to the 1950 census in that district, was Polish. The second language was Czech. And I think English did come in somewhere along there, but it was a very ethnic district. After Congressman Kluczynski, I went to work for Congressman Eilberg from the northeast side of Philadelphia. And I was with him more than anybody, 4.5 years. He was just a wonderful person. One of my friends from law school happened to be dating and ultimately married a very wonderful gal, sharp young lawyer. I think she was from South Carolina. But she was the assistant chief of a new division in the administrative office of the U.S. courts in Washington. It was the Division of Management Review at the time. What the name is now, maybe the same, I'm not sure. But it was brand new, very young staff, and I happened to meet her boss at some social event, and we started talking. By this time, I had just left Congressman Eilberg to go to work for what turned out to be about a year and a half. A fellow I had gone to DePaul with would run in an unwinnable race, except Richard Nixon happened at the Republican Party, and my former classmate was shocked to be elected congressman before he stayed for 18 years, as a matter of fact. I set up the office for him, and I was getting a little antsy about what I was going to do now that I had a law degree. And I meet this very charming guy, Jim Eberhorst, who had started this new division, and was impressed by my good friend's then fiance. And all of a sudden I get a job offer to become executive officer of the Division of Management Review. Well, I took it. And I went there in, I believe it was 74. Yeah, 74. And Eberhorst became very ill. Nancy got married, my buddy, and they moved to California, his home state. Both practiced law together. One of the children, the first of whom was a boy, was my godson. I succeeded Nancy as assistant chief, and when Jim was very ill, I was acting chief for a short time. And then a new man came in, and I was transferred to the bankruptcy division. And I could hardly spell bankruptcy. But that gentleman was replaced. A lady was appointed chief of the division who had been one of my co-workers. And I returned there and then finally got into the field and got to some wonderful places. We had Detroit and Cleveland. I went to San Diego. I couldn't believe it, but my wife and I ended up having a second honeymoon when I ended up being honored to do the court study in the Virgin Islands. And it was just a fascinating experience. But as I say, it was a young staff. I had seen several marriages go down the drain because some of our assignments would be 3 and 4 weeks in a larger distance. South Dakota, I think we did all 3 cities within a week. But it was an awakening to see some very, very fine couples with young children split up. Well, I get back from my serendipitous assignment to do the district court review work in New Orleans. And my wife greets me. We're married 6 years, and that time we did have 1 miscarriage. So we were on the line for adoption, etc. She said she was pregnant. And at that point, I came to the conclusion, I can't continue doing this because I'm not going to put my marriage at that level. I then applied for, I applied for a job as the top aide of a congressman from Buffalo, New York, who was recommended to me by someone I knew who was a lobbyist. Interview went very well. Looked like I was going to get the job, but I didn't hear. The folks who had done the bankruptcy review when I was here in New Orleans doing the district court review said came up and told me that the clerk was about to retire and that the situation was perfect for my skills and personality, etc. And there are some people here who may take exception to that. That's up to them. Again, serendipitously, did apply for the job. Came down for the interview. Judge Brainy, who at the time was the chief judge, Judge Kingsville, interviewed me. They said they'd hear from me for a week, within a week. I'd hear from them within a week. It was several weeks before Brainy called me and offered me the job. And I took it. It meant we were going to, we had just looked forward to living in Washington. We had a nice home in the Virginia suburbs, but things were changing. And so we decided we were going to come down here. The next day, the congressman offered me the job to head his staff, and I turned that down. And that began in 85. And I was clerk here from 85 to 2000. And I retired. And I see here one of the things, Frank will remember the fight I went through to get indirect lighting. Remember that one? Which I see they still keep. I forget the name of the organization, the federal organization that's in charge of building. What am I thinking of?
TSA? GSA.
GSA. For some reason, at the initial stages, and this is when I came in, the initial stages of the effectiveness of what was, I think then, the first bankruptcy restructuring in 70 years. I was right there at the beginning. Richard Household, a great clerk for many, many years in the, I think, Central District or Eastern District, I forget which, I think it's Central District of California, was the first president of this organization. And one of the questions that you listed was, why did I campaign for president? I didn't campaign. I was nominated. We had our first meeting here in New Orleans. I had been clerk for a matter of months, I think. And somebody nominated me from the floor to be Richard's vice president and president-elect. And that's how I got the job. But one of the latitudes we had in those days was that we had, and I don't think it's the case anymore, but we had pretty much free latitude with our budget. And we had a small space on the first floor of the district courthouse. It's all one unit now, but then it was split. There was, where you see the entrance right now, was open area. There was a space between. This was the federal building, that was the federal courthouse. We had a very limited amount of space on the first floor, and we did the best we could with it, but the district court was expanding and they kicked us out. We were given space on the 7th and 6th floor, as you know now, and I had the latitude to hire an outside contractor to help me plan the space. Because, and I did that because I had gone through, the district court had built a couple of courtrooms here, which were, you know, I'm not hired, so I can't be fired, which are terrible. I mean, there was literally one of the courtrooms, I don't know if it still exists, but where there was a column right in front of the judge's bench. I mean, literally right in front of the judge's bench. And I said, well, I might be dumb enough to do that myself, so let me get somebody who knows what she's doing. And indeed, I got, I forget her name, Kathy, it was 25 more years ago. Anyway, Kathy, somebody, came through with a marvelous plan. The two courtrooms, have they changed much? Are just wonderful. And the space for our staffing was logically set up as to minimize space needs and maximize efficiency. Example of why that was important to me. When I came here first, we had literally file cabinets full of our active case files, which were, and this is not an exaggeration, this gentleman was here, he was here before me, he knows what I'm talking about. We literally had 5 drawer file cabinets, the equivalent of about a half block, where down the hallway from our clerk's office past the judge's chambers, where if somebody had to get one of our staffers had to get a case for somebody starting with the letter Z, she had to run the equivalent of a block back and forth. Well, that wasn't too smart, even I could tell that. So that was something we changed while we were still down there. I got we had a room that was devoted to like a waiting area. Instead, I got the GSA people to find me a couple of old benches, the equivalent of old church benches, and we put them out in the hall, general hall, and then we took over that waiting space and set up a real entry, front counter, which we did not have at the time. But when we did move here, we had a very fine situation. But one of the funny stories I came away with was one of the things Kathy introduced me to. I had no knowledge of this. Was this idea of indirect lighting, and I thought, well, it is softer lighting. And then she made the point that studies had been made. We were getting into computerization under this gentleman's great leadership. As you heard at the meeting yesterday, he was only a gift to us. And when I came here, he was not Mr. Computer. What were you doing at the time?
I think I was in chapter 13 clerk.
Chapter 13, But he just has a natural gift for the area. And he became not only a gift to us and as the young lady said, to the Baton Rouge headquartered Middle District of Louisiana. He went around the country and helped out in a lot of places getting stuff, and has a great reputation, deservedly so. But one of the things Kathy focused on was that studies had been made that this type of lighting is especially good for computer usage because of eye strain problems, etc. That would have never occurred to me. I'm a lawyer. They taught us no really useful skills, just to get the fee first, and if you don't know what you're doing, start pounding the table. So I followed her advice, and I requested that the new space be amplified in this way. For some reason, the fellow who was in charge, the gentleman from Texas came here, he was adamant that it was going to be the traditional. Well, I'll tell you, I felt you heard of the incarnation where the Savior is supposedly at one point in the presence of the apostles, or a couple of the apostles, passage. Have Moses on one side and Elijah on the other. Well, I told Judge Brady and Judge Kingsman my problem, and we were going to have the meeting where the determination was going to be made. Somewhere in this building, wherever GSA is, in their conference room. And we were there for 2 hours. Neither judge said one word the whole time, but they were there on each side of me as I was making the presentation. But the real closer in the whole deal was when this very elderly, he happened to be a Jewish man with a slight Jewish accent, but he was right with everything. He was head of the architectural firm that was actually going to do the work, and did a lot of work, had done a lot of work for you. He finally opened his mouth and looks at me and said, it has been determined in studies of this kind of lighting that I was referring to, that there are electrical savings of from 10 to 25% per year, and that closed the deal. I then, after I retired, I found out that GSA has a sample building in Washington where they highlight this type of lighting now and recommend its use. I looked upon myself as a pathfinder, pioneer, fighter in a progressive way there, as while I was in the field. I think it was in the San Jose office of the Northern District of California. I was interviewing a young woman in the district of the bankruptcy court who offhandedly told me that if she was crossing the park where William McKinley made his last speech before his assassination in Buffalo, New York, she was crossing the park from the federal courthouse to the Federal Reserve Bank to deposit the money, which was the tradition of the courts for years. She was held up. She was right. So I made the brilliant, obvious, I like to say, but it's written was really obvious. Why don't we have an armored car pick up the money? And that was one of the other contributions I made to the betterment of the court system, I'd like to say. And soon that became standard policy too. So those were two things I did positively in the 15 years. The first the armored car idea was before I got it. I don't know that I was worth much more than those two ideas. He may have an idea about that, but we had a wonderful staff here, and it was great doing it. Now,
When you came,
am I long-winded?
this is one. When you came to the court,
Yeah.
it was 1985.
85, yeah. 85 and 2000.
NCBC had been established in 1980.
Mm-hmm.
How did you find out about the organization? When did you join? And why did you think it was an important thing to do?
Oh, well, it was founded in 1980. Is that right? Okay. I became aware of it. Now, I have to be very, very honest with you. This is, I'm very deeply in my late 20s for the third time. So my memory is not what it might be. I don't know, to tell you the truth, when I became aware of it. I'm sure I became aware of it when I was clerk, and I joined immediately. I thought Richard Helfman was the first president, but if it goes back to 1980, he may not have been. I was his successor. I described the meeting we had here as you're going to have next June here again. I was nominated from the floor. I don't know if because my staff put on such a good show to make me look good and set things up well, that they thought I had anything to do with it. But I was nominated from the floor to be Helfman's vice president.
How did you perceive the organization at that time? Where did you think it was, and where did you think it might go?
I thought, as I mentioned at the meeting yesterday, having been a staff member of a member of the Judiciary Committee, both the congressman I served with longest and the last one I served with the last year and a half here, were on the Judiciary Committee, and I was very aware, although the subcommittees they both served on were not the subcommittees that handled the bankruptcy reform legislation. As a staff member who was required by the fellow from Philadelphia to really have exacting information, I was very well aware of the contentious issues going on, and by the time I became clerk, I was convinced, especially with the liberality we were initially given with the budget, which was not the history of the federal court system. The AO had to approve every little thing you did. It took months, but when that law became effective, and I think it affected the district court system too, clerks had a great deal more flexibility in how they were going to operate, organize, etc. And it was so wonderful seeing my old friend Barry, fellow from San Diego. Yeah, Land, yeah. Who after reading the material that the gentleman from Pittsburgh gave me about the conference last summer, I realized that it was also the best person. He was just, Barry was and is just an enthusiastic and very positive kind of fellow. The benefit of the organization, it seemed to me, was that it brought us together to share ideas. And that's where creativity emerges. And I have totally lost memory of one of the issues you're very apt paper describes, that there was controversy over extending the leadership beyond the clerks themselves to total membership. I thought that was just not only a good idea, a great idea, but more than that, a natural idea. I mean, you want to build your membership. You want to integrate. You want people like this fellow who has a natural gift with IT work to interact with somebody who has had it joisted upon them and may not have all the confidence in the world to interact with somebody like Frank Radowski. You want somebody who has some personality problems with dealing with a judge. That does happen occasionally. I was very fortunate. I did not. But there are some, I could go through some people I know were let go because of personal problems, not their own fault, but they just didn't mesh well. It helps to be able to interchange ideas as to approach. An example, when I got here, technically, even in those olden days, the courtroom deputy was a member of the clerk staff. Well, when I got here, the courtroom deputies were pretty much the choice of the judge. And they kept the same people. Now, was I going to fight that fight and say, hey, those are my people, I get to say who's what and who does what? No, that would have been foolish. And it would have been foolish for a very good reason. The two people involved were very capable, and there was a very fine relationship. What I did was to make sure that there were other people trained in that area who would occasionally go into the courtroom with those people, or in their absence, illness. I think one lady had a baby here, so she had other things on her mind for a significant period of time. But what I did was make sure I lived with the system. I dealt with the system as it existed here, and made sure that it was better and effective. And I think it worked out well. I don't know if that's still how it's handled now, but I've been gone 10 years. I can't say. No, does that answer you?
It does. Let me ask you about your time as president of the NCBC. What were some of the issues that came up to be addressed during your term?
Well, the grand issue of several terms. Health is mine. One of the great people in this system with the fellow who was my vice president, succeeded me, as I'm sure you know him very well, Bob Weiler, great fellow. As an incidental, as I may have mentioned, I'm a Catholic, and Bob is a Mormon. And I remember him telling me that his two sons were going to go off to Italy to do, as young Mormons do, for 2 years of missionary work. And I very dramatically got on my knee and asked him, Bob, please ask your sons not to convert to the Pope. And he cooperated. But he was just, he held Terry Dunn. I don't know if Terry was ever president, just retired as clerk of Oregon. That was one of my last studies. And poor Terry had to deal with me 1 week after he became clerk of court. And he and I, through some miracle, good Lord, have remained, great friends for years. And he is very gifted, but Wiley was sensational. But during the early period you're talking about, the grand issue was working out how the bankruptcy, the now quasi-independent bankruptcy system of courts was going to interact with the previously dominant, but still ultimately controlling district court system. It was very, very touching. As I explained at the meeting yesterday, having been familiar with the legislative process, I showed the picture of Congressman Rodino, who was chairman of the Judiciary Committee at the time, but it worked out a compromise whereby the bankruptcy court system would have been totally independent over a period of years, as a bankruptcy judge's term would terminate his renewal or his successor's position would rise from an Article 1 court to a life tenured Article 3 court, which over a 10, 15-year period would have given the bankruptcy court total independence as a separate unit of the federal judiciary, on a par, not as a subordinate to the district court. Well, because of political happenings within the bankruptcy judges' board of directors, especially as I understand it, the president at the time, who was the chief judge, I believe, of the Eastern District of Virginia, was adamantly opposed to that. He wanted immediate independence. Well, he got nothing as a result, because the Rodino Compromise was set aside, and as the structure is what it is to this day. Bankruptcy courts are still quasi-independent, but certainly not fully independent. In the years you asked about, my 2-year tenure, Richard's prior 2 years, Bob's subsequent 2 years, whomever came afterwards, and my memory leaves me at that point. It was dicey at times in certain places. It was very uncomfortable. Here, I was, as a matter of fact, the clerk, the lady who was clerk to the district court at the time I came, she had just become clerk when I did the study, and had been clerk for about a year when I finally took over. Her daughter is an employee of the bank right now. We got along very well. We operated, as colleagues, and there was no problem betwixt the judges, by two bankruptcy judges, and I don't know what the size of the district bench is now, but it was a good, I'd say 12 to 15 people back when I started. We were lucky. It was not common steady home. But that was the key issue at the time, to work out a functional relationship between the new semi or quasi independent bankruptcy system with the existing Article 3 district court system.
In your opinion, did the NCBC address that issue well?
Yes, I do think so. Now, of course, I'm saying, since I was president for 2 of those tenuous, sensitive years, I'm kind of patting myself on the back, but I think I did. I tried to be diplomatic, helpful, and Wiley especially. Wiley is a gifted diplomat. And, they just took the right approach, and since we're still around, I imagine subsequent presidents did the same. I'm sorry, I can't remember, I was active after I left office. I attended all the meetings, but I just forgot the fellows who became president and ladies who became president after Wiley. And maybe it's because he was such a great and is such a great person.
How do you think the organization grew during your term of office, subsequent to your term of office, and kind of review, if you will, the trends that you saw beginning to happen during the time that you were
Well,
active?
I'll tell you, as I indicated at the time, at the meeting yesterday, I was very, very lucky. I was lucky to be aware of my own limitations, first of all. I learned early on, probably when I was running the congressional office, but certainly here, I listened to my staff. I listened to the people on the front line. I had was it monthly or weekly staff meetings? Weekly, yeah. We're weekly full staff meetings. We'd open on a Friday a half hour later. Get together at 8:30 and go from 8:30 to 9. We really open, I think, at 9. And we'd open a half hour later. And I'd have constant meetings with the heads of unit of the various units as we were then divided. How it's structured now, I'm not sure. And when I said I had an open door policy for anybody at any time, it was negotiable. And I think the success we experience here and in other places was because we had a new system. A lot of the clerks were very open. Several weren't, didn't do especially well. It didn't last, especially long. Now there was a part of what you said that was very important, asked was very important that escapes me right now. How did I think it went? The first couple of years it went very well because we had, from a manager's point of view, I had great latitude. With the passage of time, Washington or the district court judicial establishment, I don't know where it came from, the AO or the district court establishment. Article 3 status judges tightened up our, not only the bankruptcy court clerks' budgetary latitude, but that of the district court clerks as well. For a short period of time, relatively short period of time, in the 80s, a lot of the bureaucracy was removed. A lot of the bureaucratic impediments were removed. Don't forget, when we're speaking of the federal judiciary, we are speaking of a bureaucracy in its whole, not only in the Washington establishment of the administrative office of the U.S. courts and the Federal Judicial Center, but staffing throughout the country. We're not dealing in the numbers that we generally think of when we think of the federal government as a whole. And the need for bureaucratic fine-tuning from on high, frankly, is not necessary. I mean, that's an opinion that it's my very strongly. If we were better off with it, as long as there was oversight of what we were doing. I mean, if somebody's cashing in, as happened in a couple of occasions, I'm sure, people were removed and they spent some time where people would not like to be. But as long as there is adequate oversight, for instance, I made the example here. I had a staff where in one weekend we had a mother raped in front of her child. We had a woman, one of our more elderly ladies, robbed and beaten and out of service for a significant period of time. And I forget the third specific occasion. Somebody had a major medical health problem, cancer or some sort of major surgery that knocked them out. Well, the spirit of this staff was such that we didn't miss a beat. I told you yesterday how in the early days when we were just getting started, we were being overwhelmed. In the mid-'80s, the bottom fell out of the oil industry here in Louisiana, and this district, its percentage of filings just blossomed as I came in. I hope people didn't think I brought it with me, but it was happening. And people like this gentleman stayed an extra 2-3 hours at night. They spent 8-hour Saturdays. I had no way of compensating them for the extra time. Well, as time went on and the greater latitude was given to clerks, we reorganized, and Frank's genius with the IT end of things introduced greater efficiency in our operations. A series of restructurings took place that made things more efficient. One of the things that shocked me, any person thought they had the latitude to walk into the clerk's office and start going through files of the docket codes, which is just crazy. But it was the way things operated here for years. I remember stopping a very nice lady reporter from one of the local papers who was just going through one of my staff people's file cabinet with her sitting there. You can't do that. She said, we've always done it. I said, we're not doing it anymore. And I had a staff meeting. I said, what's going on? Another thing was, we'd get a mail request and it would be thrown into a box, and it would be gotten to when we got to it. And, it may have been the last thing that came in that got answered, and the thing that's 3 months old is out. Well, the first summer I was here, we were blessed with, I got some friends back in DC, and I was able to get some emergency funding to hire 4 students, I remember. And I remember one of the guys who went on to get his PhD and was teaching. He was taught in Germany and Ireland, and I don't know if he's back in the States yet, but he was an absolutely brilliant kid from Loyola University here at the time. And his sister, I think, is still in charge of the finance and things. I hired her about a year after his time with her. But I took him aside and said, Carl, I don't know what's in this box, but you go into that office, and as long as it takes you, you organize these things in chronological order, and we address it. And from that time on, as soon as we got hold of that problem, when a request came in, a request went out the same or next day. That was an example of taking over a new operation, being new to an operation that existed. And, operations take on lives of their own. Now, I don't know that if my meandering answered your question.
Well, it engendered another question
Yes.
that I didn't include in the ones that I sent you, but I'm just wondering, what was the relationship between the NCBC and the administrative office?
I think very good. I mentioned at the time, I was so glad to get that booklet from Mr. Holden, I think it is, from Pittsburgh. Holden, yes. Who was the host of your last conference. And I went through it last night, and I saw Glenn Powellman's picture. Glenn and I worked at the AO at the same time. And he's still there. He looks a lot younger than I do, but I guess he always did. But and then, of course, there was the fellow I forgot to mention yesterday, whom I considered a brother, and it just broke my heart. Within a month of his retirement as chief of the Bankruptcy Judges Division, Frank Zayden passed away. It just killed me when one of our co-workers, one of our colleagues from Management Review, was on his staff and remains on the staff of the Bankruptcy Judges Division, Kevin Gallagher. We had people there in the AO who, a lot of the people who were in management review and had gone and actually seen operations in courts. Good operations and, frankly, bad operations. Operations that, because of unique local realities, worked someplace but wouldn't work elsewhere. And a lot of those people in the in management review, the early years, there. I was there within a year of its beginning. I was 6 months old when I joined. A lot of those people went to other divisions. Zabac was, I think, the greatest example. Kevin Gallagher is another one. There were other people. Several of us became clerks of either district or bankruptcy courts. But there was a connection. And for example, I as my duty as assistant chief of the management review division and then acting chief for a short time. There were occasions I'd attend the director's weekly staff meeting representing the division. There were other people with a relationship with the courts over time, and so the NCBC's relationship with the AO, and I attribute it to a good deal to the leadership. And I'm not only talking about the president, the members of the board. We kept in close contact with each other, and we kept in close contact with the AO. And I think it worked out well. Now, the thing that I wish had continued was the kind of latitude in budget flexibility we had. One of the things I was leading to, and mentioned yesterday, was that once we got caught up and organized in this court, I would leave one or two positions vacant. Now, the budget operation at the time, I don't believe it remains the same now, was that they'd look at your statistics at the A, and they would allot you a certain number of slots and the equivalency in funding. I kept 2, 3, 4 slots vacant. Not affecting operations. We were very efficient, large measure through this guy's constant updating of our computer capability. I, for one, still have a hard time spelling the word computer, but I had Frank guide me, and it worked very well. What I would do at the end of the year with that unspent money would allot for, I don't know, I did it for about 5 years. I allotted bonuses to the people who were working their part of their anatomy. And we had a very, very smooth operation, and they deserved every penny they got. I don't know, there were about $500 pension bonuses at the end of the year, something like that. And I did that deliberately. Now, I understand a couple of years after that, things were tightened up. I think there were financial wrongdoing in certain operations, and that may have been a problem that was being addressed. But clerks, at least my clerks, as far as I know, no longer have that latitude. If you don't fill a position, the money's not allowed. At least it happened within a couple of years of my leaving. I think the last time that was done was in the Christmas, New Year's season of 1999. I retired officially on January 1st, 2000. And I think it was a good idea. It worked well. But essentially, let me just sum up your cogent question of did the NCBC work well in advancing the interests of the bankruptcy family, talking about judges, clerks' offices as a functional combination. Absolutely. There was some marvelous leadership.
Do you think that they,
Except
do you think that they met the goals, or were in the process of meeting the goals that the early leaders set? I'm going to ask the question, were they aggressive enough? But what I mean by that was, were they being responsive to the bankruptcy community and representing the bankruptcy?
I think absolutely. There were not only you used a very appropriate word. Were they aggressive enough? Yes, they were aggressive enough. But also, another important word was they were diplomatic. The combination of appropriate aggressiveness as needed and diplomatic implementation thereof, I think, got us off to a darn good start.
Well, it's certainly good enough that the NCBC celebrated its 30th anniversary last year. Quite an accomplishment.
Quite an account.
I know you have not been quite as active in the last few years, but where do you see the organization now? And where do you think it may most appropriately serve its constituency in this case?
Well, let me answer something. The first thing you said, I haven't been in, but after your kindness in contacting me and my enthusiasm being folks yesterday, I am going to rejoin, and I look forward to being at to the extent I can be. The rest of your question,
Looking at the organization, kind of where it is now.
well, I think it's grown. I think you have 600 members.
We actually have somewhere in the vicinity of 1,500.
1,500 members of several. Oh my God. Well, that to me that speaks for itself. I think I have not been closely involved for 10 years. Occasionally speak to some of my closest friends like Wiley and Terry Dunn. I've been doing some court advisory work in Eastern Europe, as I think I had mentioned, and I would call some of my people who I thought were really on top of things from a practical point of view for ideas that I'd run into. We have the civil courts, civil law system throughout Europe, and the common law. I've become a greater fan of the common law system after seeing the way court documents are filed in the Ottoman method in certain out-of-the-way courts in Bulgaria, for instance, where they literally put needles through the papers and have them stack up in open rooms. Hopefully by now, that was one of the recommendations I made in 2005. Let's stop that. It's still taking place. There's a great deal we can do to improve it, but it's become an ever greater fan of the common law system. The great distinction that I've seen with my own eyes is the civil law system seems to be predicated on the issue that everybody's a danger. The common law system, wisely, is predicated on the issue ain't necessarily so proven. And there's a lot to be said for that. The NCBC, I think, has been, from the impression I have, a very, very impressive body of people who have been meeting this. It's come a long way. I don't pretend to have knowledge of much that's occurred over the last 10 years. I'd be dishonest if I tried to tell you that. But it seems to have grown with the needs of the system, and the people I remember who were there pretty, who are still there. We're a pretty impressive lot, and the new ones came under that. Now, I don't know if that's answered your question, can be clear.
Well, let me ask you probably one final question. The three prongs of the NCBC have always been there, but they are even more strongly advocated now: leadership, advocacy, and education. What do you think the next leaders of the organization should be doing, need to do in order to further those concepts?
That's a good one. And not having been around for 10 years, the presumption to get too far into it. I will say this. Build your relationship with your own people to find out what the need is. Let the idea of the open door policy not be a cliche. Have regular interaction and be willing to admit to yourself and others, as Frank knows, made a great point of I don't know it all. That is the seedbed of developing ideas for progress of the NCBC as a whole, and the NCBC as an effective element in the overall picture of the judiciary. Something else I would strongly recommend is that greater liberality, tight oversight, but that we return to a greater liberality of budget flexibility as we had in those initial years I was there. Let the lady or man in charge of things, let Uncle Sam's people from Washington look tightly over his or her shoulder. That's the way we keep things straight, and that's the essence of my belief in the common law system. Ain't nobody a saint. But greater flexibility at the local level to purchase something, to give year-end bonuses, etc., makes for greater efficiency. Now, I don't know if that's adequately answered your question, but I don't have the immediate background for the last several years to be more specific than that. But the key to all of them, to the three prongs spoken, the primary one is education and interaction with your own people, interaction with your colleagues. I don't know what
I think those are great words of wisdom,
Well,
and I've enjoyed the interview with you. Thank you very
well,
much for
it
being
is
with me.
great